You know, I've known Charlie Kirk for several years now. I know him to be an upstanding young man, intelligent, ethical, honorable, and he says very, very smart things. And I consider him a good friend. Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Honored to be here. Thank you.
Well, it is true. And you were almost assaulted by a mob the other day, and I'd like you to explain to the audience what took place.
Yeah, that's correct. It's an extraordinary story, Mark. So we had a Turning Point USA chapter event at University of California, Davis, where a violent Antifa mob tried to gain access into our event and into the building, and they smashed windows and vandalized the building, assaulted a police officer, hurling projectiles at our attendees. Thankfully, nobody was hospitalized, praise God. But the real story behind this, Mark, which is extraordinary, is how the chancellor of the university incited this mob. Earlier in the day, the UC chancellor, Gary May, who earns over $800,000 a year, made a video saying Charlie Kirk is coming to campus, who's a spreader of misinformation and hate. Sound familiar? I always use the same words. But then he said something that was materially and factually untrue. He said Charlie Kirk says that violence should be committed against trans people. Now, that is an outright lie, Mark. I've never said that. I don't believe it. In fact, it is the opposite of my beliefs. It is a 180-degree Orwellian lie. It originated from an internet rumor that before his video, the Sacramento Bee published, where they said in their newspaper, quote, Charlie Kirk calls for the lynching of trans people. And this is all a lie. It's unsubstantiated. There's no evidence. Of course, I would never say something like that. But guess what? It's before the truth could come out, the lie spread into a mob, and somebody could have really got seriously hurt. And so thankfully, I'm okay. Thankfully, our students are okay. It made national headlines at this university in Davis, California. But the lesson here is that the adults, the chancellor, the people that should know better, that should act ethically with honesty, went out of their way to lie about me, and it created a mob.
You know, Charlie Kirk, even though they apologized, the damage was done.
Yes.
And not that I'm a supporter of slip and fall ambulance chasers, but in this case, where violence ensued, where everyone saw it on the video, seems to me you ought to at least consult somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to libel. No?
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. And again, I don't like going to the courts just out of a gut reaction. I'm like you, Mark. I just try to do my business and try to get young people to love America. That's why I do what I do. But I think we might pursue legal action here, first against the Sacramento Bee, because we sent them. They had 12 hours to try to correct the article, and they decided not to. And then they had a reporter at the actual riot itself that was live tweeting, reinforcing the lie, saying the anger here on the ground is because Charlie Kirk wants to have violence against trans people. That's a material falsehood. And so, yes, they have apologized. But are they apologizing because they think they were wrong, or are they apologizing because they got caught? And I think they're apologizing because they got caught and they realize that a lot of damage was done because of their dishonesty and their deceit. And if you listen to the UC Chancellor's video, again, someone who's in a leadership position of a major university in America, he was almost encouraging the mob. He was almost stoking it. You watch it. It's a 3.5-minute video. It's extraordinary, where he says, I know a lot of people are going to be very upset. There's nothing we can do to stop the speaker, but it would be very powerful. Quote, if Charlie Kirk ended up speaking to an empty room tonight. He was cheering for the mob to try to prevent people from entering the building. And so there's First Amendment violations here. There's campus speech neutrality precedent that was probably violated here, because as university president, he's not allowed to pick sides of what speakers he likes and doesn't like. And then, of course, there's libel and defamation here.
And has he circled back and said anything to you?
He has been a silent coward, and I think that's a prerequisite to be in charge of a California university.
Or most, for that matter. Not all, but most. Right. And isn't this a problem all around the country? That is, the fact is that if you're a conservative, you are not welcome on the vast majority of college campuses, and you take your safety and the safety of people who want to listen to you into your hands and their hands.
That's exactly right, and it shouldn't have to be that way. Some people were kind of being a smart aleck, and they've asked me on social media or emailing me, Charlie, why do you go to these liberal places? Aren't you just, trying to stew them up? And I say, boy, what a silly question. You should be able to go to an American college campus, regardless of where it is, to be able to talk about liberty and freedom. Give me a break. I mean, we're now in a country where you're not allowed to go set foot on a college campus because you're a conservative. And look what happened at Stanford. I know you've been covering that, Mark. It's an extraordinary story. The federal judge that was heckled by not just the law students, but the dean of diversity, equity, inclusion, or whatever the title is there. And look, I wrote the book, The College Scam. You were super generous, Mark,
Great
in the
book.
promotion of that last summer. Thank you. And I hate to say that the argument we laid out in the book is exactly right, that these campuses have become islands of totalitarianism, that the greatest generation 70 or 80 years ago fought Marxism, fought these terrible ideas, now only see their grandkids go to universities and embrace them and go into debt to try to believe them.
Now, Charlie Kirk, what about a group like Media Matters that runs very provocative headlines that do not often comport with the substance of what somebody says? They take it out of context, they cherry pick. And when you read these headlines that are intended to get hits, and I guess to please their radical left donors, most of whom are very wealthy Democrats, that encourages, it seems to me, trouble too, no?
Oh, without a doubt. And I mean, I deal with Media Matters almost every day, and you do too. And it is splicing and taking things out of context. I mean, look, I'm on radio. Mark, you're the great one. You've done it better than anybody else. But you know that when you get a little fired up, if you take an isolated 5-second segment, then you actually might be able to completely misrepresent the essence or the spirit of what you're trying to communicate. And they do this intentionally to try to create this almost cycle of outrage. And what we saw this week at Davis at this Turning Point USA event is that the casualty of that can actually be physical violence, is that when these lies are not innocent, they're not just annoying, they don't just slander you and people think negatively, people can actually get hurt in a very serious way. And look, our premise at Turning Point USA and why I do what I do is to try to go to the places where I'm not always welcome, where people do not always agree with me, as a reminder to the radical left that they don't run this country, and that I think we win when we go to the places where we are unpopular and not always in the majority opinion, and we show that we're not afraid of their mob violence. It
seems to me, Charlie Kirk, we have more options in Republican states than Democrat states. So Republican legislatures pour an awful lot of tax dollars into these public universities and colleges, even some of them that claim to be private. Seems to me if they're not going to allow everybody to speak on campus in a safe environment, then their budgets ought to be slashed, don't you think?
I completely agree. There is a place for robust higher learning. Look what Hillsdale has done. Every red state should learn from Hillsdale. They should send their university chancellors there and say, you either do the Hillsdale model where you pursue big ideas or your entire universities are going to be defunded. No more feminist studies, no more North African lesbian poetry, none of that stuff. Taxpayers are going to fund the pursuit of truth, virtue, and goodness, pro-American, pro-liberty, pro-Constitution, and if not, you should not get a red cent.
10 seconds. If people want to learn more, where do they go?
tpusa.com. Support Turning Point USA. We're on the front lines fighting for liberty on campuses every day.
All right, folks.